Marjorie Lees was off duty. Some of the others had cut along an alleyway leading from the recreation ground to the marketplace to hold another open-air meeting. But Marjorie, Millie Field, Ida Sharples and Mary Siddle had done more than their bit yesterday and were stood down. It was a peaceful Monday evening in July 1913. The view of the Chiltern Hills was much gentler than the Lancashire fell Marjorie and her friends were used to. The air was soft, dusk was drawing in, and after 2 weeks on the road, the women felt ready for a rest. They had left Oxford at 9:30 that morning in a strange procession of around 70 women, many of whom were unfashionably tanned, some carrying slightly grubby banners, several on bicycles and one even riding astride a horse, and shockingly dressed in khaki trousers. A few men marched with them, including an elderly fellow who had walked all the way from Carlisle, and a handful of Oxford undergraduates, so entranced by this curious company of women that they had decided, there and then, to go with them to London. One of the lads was 6 foot 7 inches tall, a useful attribute when scanning the crowds for trouble in the badlands of the home counties. Everyone paused at Headington, a suburb of Oxford, for a group photograph to be taken with an elderly lady who, it was said, had signed that famous suffrage petition to Parliament way back in 1866. They arrived at the village of Wheatley, 5 miles down the road, at noon. The scheduled luncheon at the Merry Bells did not go entirely to plan. When the innkeeper saw how many of them there were, he blanched. He had only 7 cutlets and a few hard-boiled eggs available. It was a little like the parable of the loaves and fishes, but without the happy ending. He refused to cook them anything else, so many went hungry. But they were used to that by now, and at least they weren't chased off the premises or pelted with stinking rotten potatoes. The vicar's wife at the next village tried her best, but the open-air tea she had prepared didn't quite stretch far enough either. Still, she was apparently a doctor as well as a clergy wife and drove her own motor car. That was inspirational enough, without tackling mass catering too. Now they had arrived at Thame, Marjorie could feel herself relaxing. This was a lovely spot. She and her friends sat mending their increasingly tattered linen and giggling about a picnic near Banbury a couple of days ago when Mrs. Fletcher ate so much toasted cheese that her deck chair collapsed. Then someone dropped a plate of cakes on people's heads while trying to negotiate the steps of the Ark, their nickname for the caravan that had been their home since leaving Oldham. And Annie Davis sat on her hat, after warning everyone else not to, and flattened it. The weather was so fine at Thame that the groom, Scholes, pitched a tent on the recreation ground for Miss Field and Miss Sharples before leaving for a local inn with the horses, so they had no need to cram themselves into the Ark tonight with Marjorie and Mrs. Siddle. It was 8 o'clock. They could hear the faint sounds of people singing, not very well, and high-voiced rhetoric floating across from the town centre. All was well. There were 3 wooden caravans parked in Thame that night. 2 belonged to the Oldham contingent, the Ark, drawn by a horse called Noah, and the Sandwich, drawn by Ham, and the third to a group from Birkenhead, pulled along by Polly. The Ark's comforts were limited. The bunks were surrounded by tins of food, boxes of pamphlets, a change of clothes for everyone, spare hats, luckily, countless jars of marmalade, crockery, washing basins, books, and fold-up furniture. Given the space available, it was a relief that 2 of the friends would be sleeping outside. The women bade one another good night and were just beginning to get undressed when the tone of the music and speeches they had been half aware of in the background began to change. They heard jeering and shouting, women screaming, and someone blaring a hunting horn over and over. The noise grew louder. By now it was dark. 2 voices approached the tent. A couple of breathless policemen had hurried from the marketplace to warn the women that trouble was on its way. The meeting had broken up in chaos, and a gang of hooligans was making for the recreation ground. Millie and Ida immediately